Hey everyone, Legendary Bacon here, bringing you a tutorial series on Vagrus The Riven Realm. The early access comes out on July 22nd, so I wanted to get everybody ready for that. The game can be quite challenging, so I thought I'd start a tutorial series walking through at first some of the basics and then some more advanced areas of the game. So let's jump in here and create our own Vagrus. The Vagrus is the captain of the traveling company, which is called the Comitatus. Alright, so we start off with some different races to pick from. Overall, the race is not going to critically affect your gameplay, but you can have some nice starting advantages depending on what type of character you want to play. You start off at the top here with the human, which is part of the Imperial group. I'm going to let players read the background. I'm going to skip over a lot of the text and backgrounds and save that for a Let's Play series. But let's talk about some of the different faction perks that each one has. So the Imperial has Savvy. Savvy is good for intellectual checks and skill checks in the game. There's going to be some situations where you need to have really high intellect to get certain story choices and to pass skill checks. So this is a great skill to have. The other thing that the Imperial Human gives is plus 65 to House Venere faction reputation. There's going to be different factions in the game, and starting off with an increase of 65 to any faction is a huge early advantage, and I think that's a really strong starting perk, especially for trading. The other one that this gives is resourcefulness. Resourcefulness is something that you're going to be using in combat, during tasks, and during skill checks. So it's a very important thing to have, and you typically want to raise that up as you level up. So resourcefulness is an excellent thing to have. So the Imperial is a great standard starting race, and I definitely highly recommend it. But let's take a look at some of the other races. The Tarkinian here is pretty good at trading. So if you really want to have a trading heavy focus, which is also really good, then this is a good way to go. The awning equipment gives you minus 25 consumption for workers. So you're going to have less supply that's being consumed while you travel. So this is a really good thing to start off with, especially for new players. Also, you start off with some resources. You start off with some coffee beans. So you can sell those pretty much right at the beginning and make a profit. And then you also get the Evaluate perk. This is a really nice perk for trading because it lets you know the value of anything that can be traded. And then there's the Persuasion perk. This will let you convince people in dialogue choices and different skill checks. And this can be really nice to have and lead to some interesting areas in the game without going into too much detail. And then we have the other race here. They start off with Tough. Tough is good for stamina and constitution and different skill checks, but otherwise I don't feel like it's a very strong perk to start off with, but that's just my opinion. And then starting off with the timber trade goods and the dried fruit trade goods is going to give you a bit of boost in money at the start. So this is not a bad race, but in my opinion I don't think it's one of the strongest ones. And then we have the dwarves. They also have the Evaluate perk, so which is very good for trading. They have the Dwarven Gadget, which you can sell for a good bit of money and can also be used for certain things that I won't go into. I don't want to ruin the game. The Tough perk is not bad for stamina and constitution. It's not my favorite perk, but there's some situations where having some toughness is really, really useful. So the dwarf is fun. If you like short, stocky characters with beards, then this is a good way to go. Then we have the half-elf here. They have the dexterous perk, which is good for dexterity and agility checks, and there's going to be some of those tests throughout the game, so that's useful, as well as the perception. and it's good for attentiveness and sensing things, and sometimes you can notice things that other players can't find. So if you plan to do a lot of exploring, half elf is, in my opinion, pretty good. And then you also have the luck talisman here, so that's gonna give you a little bit of a advantage in the world when you're thrown out there. And then lastly, we have the orc. The orc is a lot of fun. It was one of the first classes. If you just want to get straight into combat and you want to be more of a mercenary for hire, then the orc is a great starting race. They start off with mighty, which gives you more strength right off the bat, toughness, more stamina and constitution, and most importantly, the orcish terror totem. You can give this to one of your companions and it gives them terror, so it's a pretty good item. And then they start off with 6 ivory, which can be sold for a decent amount of money. So if you're looking for a more combative character, the orc is good to go. And there's another future race coming, the Kalini. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. So we don't have any details on that yet. This is still very early access part of the game. So once the game releases, I'm sure we'll have this other race added. So I think for most new players, I feel like the Imperial is a very forgiving start. And if you're into trading, which is what I'd recommend, then the Tarkinian is excellent. So let's jump in with the Imperial. I think that's going to be the most standard start and most forgiving. And then we have the background. So what's the background of your character? Is your character a slaver, a sorcerer, a ranger, and what do these different backgrounds give you? So if you're a veteran, you were in the military and you're used to fighting for coin, so you have a great ability here called the boost perk. This can be cast in combat on one of your companions and it temporarily raises their combat skill. This is an excellent ability in combat, and you can use it to great effect. It costs some resourcefulness every time you use one of these abilities. And then you have the tough perk, so it gives you some more stamina and constitution. So you could potentially combine this with the orc race and just really have a character with lots of stamina and constitution, and that's definitely an option. I think for most beginners, I feel like the adventurer here is one of the better starts because you get 3 more insight, which is something that you use to spend to buy skills. So insight is very good. You also get the survival perk, so when you're off the beaten track, you have a better chance of foraging for food, and for survival, I think that's really important. And then you also get +1 resourcefulness, and resourcefulness is something you need throughout the game to pass tests, to accumulate more movement points, and also used in combat. So it's a very important thing to have. So adventure is a great choice if you're not sure. When you get deeper into the game, some of these other choices are arguably better for more advanced players, but I think adventurer is really good for somebody starting out. Then we have the artisan here. So you get +1 to engineering. This helps your workforce. So it's kind of a multiplier. So your slaves and your workers will have a bonus to their workforce. And then you also get tools, which will increase your worker workforce. So if you're looking to get into mining, or you want to have a lot of slaves or workers, then the artisan, I think, is a good choice. And then you also get +2 insight, so you could even add that and increase engineering even further. You have the criminal here, so you get the con perk, which is good for swindling and lying. If you want to play somebody more on the seedy side of the game, then the criminal is a good choice. And then you also get +90 to the Loaders Guild. So if you want to have an instant reputation boost with the criminal organizations, then the Loaders Guild is a really good choice. So yeah, the criminal background is good for that. Then you have the healer. you gain +1 to aid. So this is really good because in combat, your players will get downed, and once they're downed, they can attack, and they're in a kind of a prone state. So they're still vulnerable to dying, but they're kind of taken out of the combat. With the aid, you can bring them back into the combat and kind of give them a quick heal, bringing them back out of that down state. So this is a really, really good perk. I highly recommend it. +3 medical supplies is really nice. As your companions get wounded, you definitely want to be able to heal them. And then with the healing, the healer perk, you get an increased chance of healing. So it really works really well together. So if you want to have a little bit better survivability and you plan to get in a lot of combat, being a healer is a really good background. And then we have the laborer. This is also good if you want to get into mining, because you immediately start off with prospecting, which is needed for mining and scavenging and digging things up. Mining is a great way to make money in the game. It's something that I'm going to go into more detail at a later point. And then you also start off with an extra worker. So right away you can carry more cargo or more anything. So it's really good to have. And then you also get +1 to toughness, which is good for stamina and constitution. So the laborer is really good also if you want to get into mining or start off with an extra bonus worker. It's a pretty good background. And then we have one of my favorites, the ranger. So with the recent addition of foraging, the ranger is really strong choice for that. If you want to explore and you like exploring the world, I highly recommend selecting the ranger. With the herb lore, you get a increased chance of foraging. So that percentage chance over time is going to give you really good return, especially if you add a few more points into this skill and other foraging skills. And then you also get the survival skill, which gives you even more chance of increased foraging. And then plus the hunting, which gives you a better butchering yield. So if you have some beasts of burden that you want to butcher, you can get a lot more meat out of the butchering, essentially, which gives you more supply. So this is a really good background to get, especially if you're going to do a lot of exploring and you're going to be off the beaten track. And then we have the slaver. The slaver is really good if you want to have a comitatus with a lot of slaves. Then this is kind of an essential selection. But just keep in mind, some of the companions don't like people that are slavers. But it will give you a bonus reputation with the Darius faction, which is more of a slaver faction. And it will give you +1 to intimidation. Intimidation increases your slave workforce, and it also increases your discipline effectiveness. So this is a really good perk if you plan to use a lot of slaves. And then you immediately get +3 slaves, which is quite a lot. That's an extra 6 cargo, because every slave carries 2 cargo. And the nice thing about slaves is they have no upkeep cost. So that is really, really nice over time and less consumption. But there are some downsides to having slaves, especially with some companions that just don't like you disciplining them. And then you have a slave cage, which gives you an immediate +25 discipline modifier. So that's going to keep your slaves in check. Also, this item can be useful for some events in the game. Let me just tell you that much without going into too much detail. And lastly, we have the sorcerer. This is my personal favorite because I really like the +4 insight, and for advanced players I feel like this is the strongest start, but it's probably one of the harder ones because there's no immediate perk that helps you out here. Empower is it boosts up your characters in combat, but honestly the Empower perk is not that great in combat. It's got its purposes because you immediately can grant more POW to one of your companions. So in some situations it's useful, but I just feel like there's better combat perks than Empower, in my opinion. But the plus magic sense is really nice for scouting, and it can also be useful in some events in the game, as well as the history perk. This is your character is gonna have better knowledge of the history of the world, pre and post calamity. So this is a really good skill if you plan to do some exploring and you want to find out more about the world as you go. But for our purposes, we're going to start off with the adventure, which I think is good for new players. All right, and then we have the calling. So what is your calling? So do you plan to be a trader? Are you going to be running convoys from city to city trading? This is a really, really good start, especially for new players. I won't go into all the details, but essentially we already know about the evaluate perk, and if you combine that with the other races, you can really boost up your evaluation quite high, so this is really good. The traverse to gain extra movement points on the campaign map is awesome, really good. And then +1 slave, +2 workers is nice. The extra storage is essential. This is really, really good. I mean, you can buy it later in the game, but having it off the bat is nice. And then the +30 house Venari faction rep is awesome. So this is my favorite calling, and I think it's really good for new players. And then you have the mercenary. So if you want to be doing more combat right out of the gate, you could combine this with the orc plus the veteran, and that's going to give you a really strong start. So you got the command, which is going to give one of your characters more strength, so you can immediately do more damage on one of your companions, which is really good. An extra scout, which is good for foraging. You also get the standard armaments, which you can buy for not too much, but an extra 5% in combat is a great bonus. And then you get intimidation, which is good for keeping your slaves in line, and it's also good for some events in the game. And then you get +3 fighters, which is really good early on because you'll be able to win a lot of combat that way. And lastly, we have the Explorer. I feel like this Explorer is more for advanced players. You get an extra fighter, an extra 3 scouts, and a looking glass. The looking glass is good for scouting. So this is for a player that plans to explore the world and get off the beaten track and find some of the hidden stuff in the world. This is a good calling for that. And then you get resourcefulness, which is good for everything. It's good throughout the game, as well as the survival perk, which slightly increases your foraging, and the enhanced perk, which increases your success in some events. So the Explorer is really good when you want to go off the beaten track. I think for most players, and especially most new players, I feel like the Trader is definitely a good choice. And the other ambitions are not unlocked yet, so we're just going to go with the free play. And lastly, the perks. Now, this is going to really come down to your preferences, but I'm going to go with some ones that are going to be good for new players. So if you're planning to do mining, then the prospecting is quite good, but we're going to go +1 to evaluating because we want to have a little bit of advantage in trading is going to be good. And then we also want to have charisma. There's a lot of events, especially early on, that need charisma. And we're gonna get the aid, because this can bring a down player back in combat, and for survivability for a new player, that's going to be really important. So there's a lot of other ways you can get. There's a lot of great professions, attributes, and leadership abilities that you can get, but I feel like this is a pretty good start for us. All right, and then let's name our character. And let's jump into the game. And that is the end of our getting started video. We're gonna follow up the second video in the series with trading and some of the basics of trading and where to go in the early part of the game. Thank you very much for watching. This is part of our Gaming with Bacon, and please subscribe and like and support the game. You can buy Vagrus on Steam, or you can go onto their website, and there's some other places you can support them as well. Thank you very much.